I have no idea if the audio for this is going to work. I'm also looking directly at the lens. Sometimes I might be gesturing over here. Sometimes I might be gesturing over here. I don't freaking know. We'll figure it out. I want to talk about the new Ulamog. Ulamog the Defiler. This is a 10 drop from Modern Horizons 3 that has just a library of text written on it. So I'm going to spare you kind of the Dickensian novel and really just break it down simply. It is a gigantic creature with a gigantic annihilator, and it even has annihilator on a ward. And if you're not familiar with what annihilator is, it is an ability that forces a certain player, like it's a one individual player, to sacrifice permanents. And in some cases, a lot of permanents. In the case of this Ulamog, it might be an insane number of permanents. So, with Ulamog the Defiler, when you cast it, one player exiles half their library. Just poof, gone. So, in a game of Commander, that could be exiling 40 cards out of the game just like that, depending on how early you actually get to cast this thing. Assuming that you're free casting it off of some kind of effect like Reenact the Crime or fight rigging, other kind of hideaway effects. And then, when it enters the battlefield, now here's the fun part, by the way. You exile half the deck, right? You don't have to do that for this card to be good. Just keep that in mind. When it enters the battlefield, it checks all the face-up cards that are in exile. It identifies the highest mana value of those cards. And it gets +1/+1 counters equal to that number, whatever it is. Exile is a big zone these days. There's a lot of stuff going into exile pretty regularly. So that's if you collected evidence at any point, if any player collected evidence at any point, escaped something, exiled a card out of a graveyard. There are tons of stuff that can do that. There are also cards that exile directly out of your opponent's hands, like Agonizing Remorse and that kind of a thing. So if something is in exile, which also counts, by the way, adventures. So if you cast something like a Virtue of Persistence, which is just a 2-drop, but when it's in exile, it's a freaking 7-drop, Ulamog would see it. And so in that case, for example, let's say I even just reanimated an Ulamog, but I had cast a Virtual Persistence earlier. It'll see that 7 CMC, 7 mana value, in exile, enter the battlefield with 7 +1/+1 counters. It now has Annihilator 7 on a 14/14 body, and it has Ward sacrifice 2 permanents. So whoever targets this thing to try to remove it has to sacrifice 2 permanents. In Commander, there is already a resource imbalance. If you are the player with the answer to the threat, you have to give up tempo, mana, and at least 1 card often in order to answer that threat. In so doing, the other players now have an advantage on you and the person whose threat just got answered. That is magnified on Ulamog because of that ward. Having to sacrifice 2 permanents is no joke. Additionally, with that Annihilator, if this card gets haste or survives long enough to attack a single player, it can knock them out of the game effectively. An Annihilator 7, of having to sacrifice 7 permanents, that could just remove a player from the game effectively. But the worst part is, it guts them, like cuts them off at the knees, prevents them from continuing the game, but it doesn't kill them. And so we're in a situation where if they don't scoop, then their life total is still a resource that the other players need to worry about and try to eliminate. But if they do scoop, then all those resources can then, don't have to be addressed towards them. So either way, you have this weird feels bad moment where you can eliminate a player without eliminating them. I think that's a pretty miserable experience. And in those kind of scenarios, if somebody were to just quit on the spot, I wouldn't blame them. Like, it makes sense. Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, couple of details. On the one hand, it's a 10-drop. It costs 10 mana, right? So 10 mana is a ton. And I know it's a ton in non-Commander formats. In Commander, with the number of treasure tokens we have lying around, the insane fast mana rocks that exist in this format, as well as just how many different ways you can cheat a ton of lands onto the battlefield, extra land drops per turn, all of these various, explosive vegetation style effects, except like way better. Remember when explosive vegetation was like the standard? Man, I missed. That was great. Anyway, but regardless, getting to 10 mana is very easy by current day standards, especially in green-based, Commander decks, your Simic decks, where the whole mechanical identity is draw cards, play lands. 10 mana has never been easier. Additionally, all of this mana is generic. So cost reduction effects like Goreclaw, they all could theoretically, if you have enough of them, stack to a point where you could conceivably get to a point where Ulamog is truly free, like costing 0. You gotta do some work to make that happen, but still, that's a scary idea, right? If you pull that off, you earned it, in my opinion. Regardless, my point is, this card it practically says remove target player from the game in many scenarios, and it's not going to be that hard to get to. I firmly believe that in Commander, in casual Commander, getting to 10 mana is similar to getting to, say, 5 mana in a format like Standard. It's not a given. You're not guaranteed to get there in any given game, but it's not exactly hard. So proceed with caution with this guy. Card's big, it's scary. If you like Eldrazi, you're eating good right now. Just play nice. That's all. This thing's a house. It's a bazooka. Be aware of that and just play nice.